Hi, this is Jeff, the host of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I wanted to tell you about an app that can change how you plan parties and celebrations at your home. Drizzly. Drizzly is the most convenient way to buy beer, wine, and spirits with delivery to your doorstep in under 60 minutes. Are you hosting a book club party and you need a couple of bottles of wine? Well, keep in mind Drizzly. Or do you and your friends make cocktails based on your favorite book characters or novels? If so, again, use Drizzly. That's DRIZLY.com. Drizzly is the #1 app for alcohol delivery. Again, that's Drizzly, DRIZLY.com. And right now, if you act, Drizzly is giving every new customer $5 off their first order. Just use the promo code FAST5 at checkout. Are you on a search for a special holiday or birthday gift for a reader in your life? A reader who loves history? Well, I've got a suggestion for you. How about giving them weekly historic letters in the mail from Letterjoy? Every week, they'll receive a letter from a famous historical figure or an eloquent eyewitness to a major event. Past Letterjoy letters have included famous defense attorneys, the United States and China, or working on the railroad, exploring the American history of the railroads. For example, one letter was an engineer writing home to his wife to describe the tough process of laying tracks for the Transcontinental Railroad. Every Letterjoy letter arrives at your door on fine stationery or parchment with a real stamp. And each letter also includes the postscript, an article by expert curators on the latest letter and the historical figures and events connected to it. Visit letterjoy.co to give weekly historic letters to the historian in your life. And I have a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Use promo code BOOKS at checkout to get $5 towards your first order. Again, that's letterjoy.co, promo code BOOKS, to give a special gift to the reader in your life. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Julia Sullivan, author of the novel Bone Necklace. Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your novel, Bone Necklace, how would you describe the novel?
Bone Necklace is historical fiction. It's inspired by the true story of America's last so-called Indian War, in which a small band of Native Americans holds off 4 converging armies while their families escape to Canada.
And do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write Bone Necklace?
I do. So the story, as I mentioned, involves this war between the U.S. Army and a small band of Native Americans. It was a 4-month running fight through 1,100 miles of Idaho, Oregon, Montana, Wyoming. But one of the bloodiest battles occurred in Montana, Wisdom, Montana, in a place not far from our home there. And so about 22 or 3 years ago, I went to visit that battle site. And that place has just owned me ever since. It's a remarkable, heartbreaking place. It's stunningly beautiful. But it's also a place where something really horrific occurred. And I just really felt a connection to that place. And I became, frankly, kind of obsessed with the story. And I've been kind of obsessed by it ever since.
And if someone listening isn't familiar with the Nez Perce War, and did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Can you give us a very brief explanation of the historical background of the war?
So the war occurred in 1877. As I mentioned, it's considered America's last so-called Indian War. The Nez Perce were the last Native people in America still living in peace on their own land. The real impetus for the war was that gold was discovered on the Nez Perce property, and it was flooded with prospectors and settlers. And these settlers created their own laws on Nez Perce land, including a law that said Native Americans could not testify against white people. And this created a situation where people would commit crimes against the Nez Perce with impunity. Robbery, rape, even murder went unpunished if there wasn't a Native American witness. And even then, the juries were, of course, all white. So this created incredible tension. This went on for almost 25 years. And in 1877, the leader of the Nez Perce presented a list of 20 white murderers that he wanted either punished or turned over to the tribe for punishment. Instead, the government ordered the Nez Perce to give up most of their land and report to a small reservation in Idaho. And while the chiefs agreed, a young man whose father had been murdered, whose father's murderer was on that list, he refused to submit. He went out looking for his father's murderer. By the end of the night, 13 people had been killed, including a white woman. And that was really the beginning of the war.
And when you were talking about the area where they lived and the discovery of gold, where was that exactly in the U.S.?
It was in Idaho, and gold was first discovered in a place called Pierce, Idaho. And Idaho still has some of those historical mines that you can go tour. What really captured my imagination about this story was this leader I mentioned, Chief Joseph, who went to the government asking that these murderers be punished. During the war, Chief Joseph became known as the Red Napoleon in the press because of his military genius, which surprised nobody so much as Joseph himself. He had never been considered a fighter. He was a elegant, eloquent man who represented the tribe in negotiations with the government. He would have done anything to avoid the war that made him famous, but he led his people in a way that was absolutely brilliant. And while most people probably assume that a story involving the U.S. Army and a small band of Native Americans would result in the inevitable defeat of the Native Americans, that wasn't the outcome of this war. And I really liked the fact that this war has certainly iconic elements, but it also has a really surprising ending.
Sure. And I'm curious, I know, I'm curious, the Native Americans who did flee to Canada, are there descendants that still live? What area of Canada did they end up going to?
Yeah. And in the final battle of the war, the Nez Perce had been fleeing for, as I mentioned, 1,100 miles. And some of them were simply too sick, exhausted, injured to continue. Joseph stayed with them and surrendered. Whitebird, a chief many people have never heard of, he didn't achieve Joseph's fame. But Whitebird was a fighter, a warrior. He was still strong, and he led 290 Nez Perce who were still able-bodied to Canada, including Joseph's wife and daughter. Joseph stayed behind, but he sent his family with Whitebird to Canada. And they arrived in Saskatchewan in terrible physical condition because of the ordeal they had been through. And sort of fascinatingly, Chief Sitting Bull, who you may have heard of from the Battle of the Little Bighorn, a famous Lakota Sioux chief, Chief Sitting Bull had been given political asylum in Canada, and the escaping Nez Perce refugees joined Chief Sitting Bull in his camp, and Sitting Bull helped them through the winter. They arrived in October with nothing really other than the clothes on their back. So Sitting Bull really helped them. They stayed with Sitting Bull that winter. They all received political asylum from the Canadian government. And then they kind of dispersed. But to answer your question, yes, there's still a large Nez Perce diaspora in Canada.
Gotcha. So what was your writing journey that led you to writing Bone Necklace? Is this your first novel?
It is my first novel. I'm a lawyer by training. I practiced law for 30 years. I still practice law, very part-time. And this story, just as I mentioned, that visit to the Big Hole battlefield really captured my imagination. And I started researching this tribe, not with the idea of writing a book, but I just wanted to know more about them. So I went to the National Archives. I got transcripts from negotiations.
Hey y'all, if you're looking for a place where you feel seen, heard, and understood, then look no further. We're Germany and Brittany, and together we make up the Black Girl Bravado podcast.
Every Tuesday, we sit down and candidly chat about the things that most of us are going through. From relationship woes to mental health and wellness, we got you covered. Our show will inspire, motivate, and encourage you to become your best self.
Basically, what we're trying to say is homegirl vibes here, and we want to link up. You can find us on all major streaming platforms and keep up with us on Instagram at the Black Girl Bravado Pod. See you there.
Between Chief Joseph and the government predating the war. I got treaties. I read articles. I went to the Library of Congress. I started visiting historical associations all over the country to collect firsthand accounts of the war. As I said, it became kind of an obsession. And pretty soon I had literally bookshelves full of research material. I published a law review article about this dispute back in 2004, but I really wanted to write a novel. I'd never written a novel before. So it took me a long time. I had to, hire editors to sort of teach me, starting with developmental editors and finally with, line editors. And then, so it's been a long process. It's taken me over 20 years. But I've really had a ball. It's really kind of bittersweet to be finishing up this project now because I'm going to miss working on it.
Well, what was that process like for you? I mean, to go from legal writing and a law review article to writing a novel. I mean, you said you worked with developmental editors. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like for you?
It was very humbling. I practiced law at a pretty high level, and I really thought I knew how to write, and I didn't appreciate how different technical writing is from fiction. It seems ridiculous that I didn't get that in hindsight, but I really did not know how hard it was going to be. And so, my first few drafts, the feedback was not what I hoped for. I wrote this novel and rewrote this novel and rewrote this novel. So it was tough. And the other difficulty was that, of course, I'm a first time novelist, which means I don't really have a team. So, I had to find my tribe. I had to find the right editor, the right agent, the right publisher. And I didn't necessarily find the right ones on the first or second or third try.
Well, what kept you going? I mean, that sounds like a pretty kind of brutal process, to be honest with you.
I could probably write a book about how not to write a book. But it's been challenging. There was only about a week where I was truly not enjoying the process. I had one really bad week. But it's all been, I found that when I decided to not worry about schedules and deadlines and just keep working until it felt right. Of course, it took me going on 22 years. So not everybody has 22 years to spend on something like this. But then that made it doable, and it kept it fun. I think if I had given myself a hard deadline, it would have been beyond frustrating.
So are you planning to write another novel?
I really struggled with that, Jeff. I'm 58 years old. I'm not sure I have, 22 years to write another one, but I think I could do it much faster this time. This has been such a learning experience, and now I have a team that is fantastic. So I think the next one, I have a couple of different ideas. So yeah, I think I will. I think it'll be like this one, where I work on it and put it away, and work on it and put it away, and eventually I get it right.
Well, given this experience that you had in writing and rewriting this novel, what writing advice would you offer for someone who's working on their own story or novel?
Well, one thing that really, really helped me was going to writers' conferences. Partly, writing is such a solitary vocation that it just really felt comforting and encouraging to be able to spend a weekend with other writers and realize that I'm not alone, that other people don't take 22 years, but, they all struggled at some point and persevered. And so just that community was helpful. But I think even more for me were the speakers at some of these conferences. I particularly have enjoyed the Pacific Northwest Writers Association conferences. The speakers are amazing. They taught me a lot about just the craft. They helped me find agents and editors who worked really well with me. So that was really great. And I guess the other thing I'd say is just be patient, and be patient with yourself, and be patient with others, and just take whatever time it takes to get it right.
Well, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Well, I'm a big fan of historical fiction, as you probably guess. And some of my favorite authors are unfortunately not around anymore, but Larry Mcmurtry is one of my absolute favorites. Of course, the Lonesome Dove series and Streets of Laredo, Comanche Moon. I love his characters. Ivan Doig, another one of my favorite Montana authors. He has these wonderful, colorful Montana characters, which I absolutely love. I think his favorite series for me was Dancing at the Rascal Fair. And interestingly, his last novel was called Last Bus to Wisdom, and Wisdom, Montana is where the big old battlefield is. So he wrote a lot of stories set in Montana. Wallace Stegner, of course, sort of the dean of Western writers, his Western landscapes, his environmental sensitivity. Norman MacLean, A River Runs Through It, is still one of my favorite books in the world ever. Cormac McCarthy. But let me think, something more recent. There was a book, I cannot remember the author, but I recently read a book called West with Giraffes. Have you heard of that?
Vaguely.
It's a book set shortly before World War II, and it's about it's also based on a true story of the San Diego Zoo trying to get 2 giraffes from Africa to San Diego. And it's just short little, like 250 pages.
Is it nonfiction or?
It's fiction.
Fiction.
So they took this real journey of these 2 giraffes,
Right?
But they added, some more interesting, colorful characters.
Right.
So anyway, I thought that was it was funny and interesting. And,
that sounds fun.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novel Bone Necklace?
www.juliasullivanauthor.com. I'm also on all the social media sites, Julia Sullivan Author.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Julia Sullivan, author of the novel Bone Necklace. The novel is available now, so go buy a copy. And Julia, thanks for doing this interview.
Thanks, Jeff. It was
Great.
fun.